On this episode of World of CONCACAF, we're headed south of the border to Mexico. Hello, welcome to the World of CONCACAF podcast. I'm Eric Schmitz.
I'm Jonathan Sleep.
And I'm Donald Wine.
And we are here to talk about Mexico. Thanks for tuning in. Really appreciate you taking the time to listen to us. We've got an exciting conversation with Jon Arnold later in the show. Do you want to take a moment to shout out all of our patrons on our Patreon? We are set up a Patreon. We've got some bonus content on there. It's patreon.com/podcacaf. Donald, I believe we have some new patrons since our last episode.
We do. Two of my really, really good friends, two of my best people, Susanna Banuez and Marcel Hilly. Thank you both for being patrons. I know we had to win you over, and I'm glad we did. DC's in the building. All my people, we're all in here.
Donald, you did a great job selling. We appreciate the support. Thanks for signing up. Now, since they are patrons, they get to enjoy all of our bonus content, including our One More Round podcast, which is going to be up on the Patreon by the time you are listening to this. So go check that out. But yeah, so I just want to do a little housekeeping here. In the past, we've tried to cram a lot of stuff into these episodes, and we got some feedback. And everyone's telling us that these things are too long. So we're going to try splitting this up. We're really going to focus on the laser focus today. We're going to talk about Mexico, and we're going to try to keep most of the conversation on that. So we'll just get right into it. The CONCACAF laser focus this week is Mexico. Donald, give us a little bit background on the country.
Yeah, well, first off, I because we're all Americans, I need you to understand that most people out there probably don't know the official name of Mexico.
I don't.
Do you guys know?
I do not. I thought it was Mexico.
So it is part of it, but the actual full name is the Estados Unidos Mexicanos, which is the United Mexican States, which is funny because we have the United Mexican States underneath the United States of America. We'll get into the number of states that they have compared to the United States in a little bit, but they have roots here dating back to 8,000 BC. I mean, we're going back. The indigenous people, mainly the Mayans and the Aztecs, were the civilizations among a couple others that discovered Mexico. And for centuries, they remained there unbothered until the Spanish Empire colonized the region beginning in 1521. They established their base as Mexico City and really took to spreading the Mexico borders north and west all the way to the Pacific Ocean. However, over time, the Mexican people developed their own identity that kind of combined the European elements of Spain, as well as the indigenous elements of some of the Mesoamerican civilizations that had discovered Mexico. And that led to them creating their identity. And they said, you know what, Spain, y'all got to go. They had a whole war about this. The Mexican War for Independence lasted from 1810 to 1821. And then they finally won their independence. September 16th, 1821 is September 16th is Mexican Independence Day. It's a very big deal for Mexican people to celebrate on that day. Of course, that was not the only war that they were involved in. There was a couple other wars that they were involved in. Most of them cost them some of their territory. First, there was the Texas Revolution, where Texas gained their independence and became the Republic of Texas before later joining the United States. And then there was the Mexican-American War. And that was, again, a war in 1848, and it led to a lot of what is now the United States to form because of the fact that it used to be all Mexico. After Louisiana Purchase, basically the entire western part of the United States was under Mexican control until the result of that war, and then they became part of the United States. So really quickly, obviously, there's another war that we won't really touch on as much, but the current war that they're in, unfortunately, is the war on drugs. And that has been one that they've been fighting to this day. It has bled a little bit into soccer. I don't think we're going to touch a lot on that, but everyone is very aware of how that has kind of bled into the soccer world and just the sports world in general. So I think it's worth it to make note of that part. I mentioned that Mexico is the United Mexican States. There are 32 of them, including the Federal District of Mexico City. It is the largest Spanish-speaking country in the world, 126 million people. The capital, of course, Mexico City, which is one of the largest cities in the entire world. And one of the things that's interesting about Mexico is has the most UNESCO heritage sites in the Americas. And of course, it's one of the most, the biggest and most important economic powers in the Americas. So that's a little bit on the history of Mexico. And I also started to bleed into our next topic, the country and the culture.
Yeah. I mean, I'll just go ahead and ask. We've all been there, right?
Yep. Several times.
Several times. Okay, so Jonathan, we've all had different experiences there. Talk a little bit about the culture, and then we'll kind of like go into what we experienced there.
Yeah. I mean, I think one of the biggest things is, when we've talked about a lot of these islands and these smaller nations, the culture of it as itself can be a little homogenic, because it's something so small, there's not going to be a lot of variation. But just with the size of Mexico, so much of it is different from because of the size. The culture is going to vary throughout the country. Really, as a whole, I mean, from the cultural perspective, with Mexico having been conquered by the Spaniards, of course, there is going to be a lot of influence from Spanish culture as a whole. Of course, from the religious aspect, it is a deeply, I would say, religious country based in Roman Catholicism. And one of the things you'll find as you go throughout Mexico, Donald touched on those UNESCO World Heritage Sites, is how old some of the culture is, as far as like it has been around for thousands of years. There is so much that's rooted in both Mayan, Aztec, the pre-Mayan period or pre-Aztec periods as well. That is just kind of on display throughout the rest of throughout the country. And I think one of the things, of course, being being on two coasts, of course, there's a lot of culture based around the water, and I think probably most people, if they've been to Mexico, a lot of people have been to either from a tourism aspect, they've been to Cancun, they've been to on the West Coast, Baja, and those areas. And so I mean, it's hard to boil down the culture into just one area.
Yeah. Now let me ask you, Jonathan, what parts of Mexico have you been to?
So I've been to both Mexico City and more of the East Coast. So like Playa del Carmen, Tulum, went to Chichen Itza as well. So I've been middle of the country, and then of course on the East Coast. What about you guys?
So I've been all over the place. I actually did a study abroad in 8th grade in Cuernavaca, which is about 45 minutes south of Mexico City. I've obviously visited Mexico City several times. Acapulco, Cancun, Cozumel, Playa del Carmen, Costa Maya. And I've also, from Big Bend National Park, I have literally crossed the Rio Grande into Mexico, into the, desert that's right up there. So I've been all over the place. And I think, Jonathan, you touched on a lot of what I was going to say. Mainly, each of these states have their own different cultures within themselves. It's kind of like the United States, right? Like, Tennessee, where you guys are, is very different from Washington, D.C., where I live. And it's just because over time, you guys have different things that you guys do that we don't, and vice versa. And, they have different regions. Their food is great, and the food changes from region to region. So even when you have different tacos or different enchiladas or anything like that, it's made differently in different parts of the country. And they also pride themselves on different things, al pastor versus, chorizo or whatever. Even those little intricacies. And I will say, while tequila and mezcal have a distinct way of being made, even that has distinct characteristics from place to place.
Yeah, and it is interesting, like how diverse it really is when it's such a spread out country. Now, I've only been to Tijuana. My experience in Mexico goes like this. So this would have been 2017. U.S. held January camp out in San Diego. I flew in to San Diego early enough that we were able to drive down. Well, we drove down from San Diego down to the border, walked across the U.S.-Mexico border, got in a cab, and went to a Xolos game. I believe it was Cruz Azul they played.
I plan on going in a few weeks. We're going to visit our friends Mark and Vishal out there, and we're going to go to a game in TJ. But so I'll be able to cross TJ off the list.
Oh yeah. It, like, for me, I mean, I don't want to get into the politics and the geopolitical stuff at all, but you hear a lot of things about the southern border, and it really is kind of eye-opening to like actually see it and kind of have your own opinion on it. Like, you hop off at, there was like a McDonald's or something right there, got dropped off, walk through customs, that get to the other side, and it is different. And you cab driver sitting there, and you just hop in a cab and go. But so outside of that night, I really haven't had much experience in Mexico. I'm looking forward to exploring more, as we intend to do in Mexico City for this upcoming qualifier. But yeah, it seems like a country where there are various destinations you can go and get a vastly different experience in any of them.
So, Eric, I know you're not going to be there long enough to actually do all of these things, right? But I mean, as you've been to TJ, so you've been honestly to a region of the country that, you know, Jonathan and I haven't. So you'll know immediately what's different and what's not about it. But like, the so many things that Mexico does great: art, food, theater, literature, architecture, just has so many different elements to it. And I hope you get to experience, besides the soccer, obviously, and the food aspect, if you're able to get out to some of the museums, or just walk around the town and just kind of look at the architecture and how it changes from neighborhood to neighborhood. It's really fascinating. And I think they do it. It's very unique how Mexico does it compared to the rest of the world.
Yeah. I mean, looking at, I think Mexico City, you'll get a good, like Don said, you're really going to know the differences between the two. And then talking about the food, I think anyone that's listening to this knows that how much all three of us love food. And just the, so like a lot of the native, foods indigenous to Mexico, of course, like corn, pepper, vegetables, avocado, sweet potato, beans, and then the pork. The Spaniards, they really introduced a lot of that pork, beef, chicken. Of course, if you can get any, al pastor, anything with, of course, with mole as well. And one of my favorite things, it is absolutely terrific. And then there's a place in Nashville that does this. Is they make tortillas. It's called the nixtamalization of corn. It's like the traditional, pre-Columbian, they make it with basically a mortar and a pestle. And just the tortillas that it produces are just absolutely incredible.
Yeah. And now let me ask you guys, what is the best thing that you've had in Mexico? What's the best meal you've had in your trips?
In Mexico, it's probably just honestly, it's mainly the tacos, just different taco joints all over the place. And again, and tacos are different in different regions, but I will say, people who have never been to Mexico and think that they have a grasp of Mexican food by going to Tex-Mex restaurants, you will learn that there's a lot of added flavors and elements that do not make it to the Tex-Mex fusion that we as Americans have kind of created. Don't get me wrong, Tex-Mex is outstanding, but some of the things that you are used to are made differently in Mexico. And for some reason, they just hit differently in Mexico. It's so very simple, right? Just the, taco with the protein, cilantro, onions, and some sort of salsa. It's just perfect. It makes for something where you can eat quite a bit. In Mexico City, we are going to have our fair share of tacos, Eric. Like, don't you worry. They're all fantastic. But there's just so many other foods there that you can try. And so many, and again, mezcal, tequila. You're not sitting there drinking margaritas and downing them and getting hammered like you would at your normal restaurant in the United States. These are sipping tequilas. They're sipping mezcals where you just kind of sit, have a drink, and observe life pass you by. And it's fantastic.
Yeah, I would say like there's a specific. I mean, I ate the last time I was in Mexico City. I ate so many great tacos, but we went to a place called El Mayor that's in Mexico City. It is right off the Zocalo, like right off the main city square, and you have it's a rooftop. You have this fantastic view into, some Aztec ruins, and just the food was not only was, the different types of tacos that we had, some of the seafood, but we had mezcaleñas, which was mezcal and passion fruit juice, and just the beautiful mixture of the smokiness of the mezcal mixed with the sweet of the passion fruit. I'd still dream about that beverage many, many years later.
That sounds delightful. Yeah, I'm very excited to get like the authenticness, like very excited about the trip. But so we've talked about Mexico. I think we do need to talk about the soccer just a little bit. This is kind of a soccer centric podcast. So soccer in Mexico, and we've touched on some of this previously here, about the way the culture has kind of grown from the Spanish influence and the wars fought. Like it's not necessarily a country that like had like soccer wasn't invented there. It was brought there. And I found a really interesting note in the Wikipedia article for football in Mexico. It says it is believed that football was introduced to Mexico by immigrant miners from Cornwall, England at the end of the 19th century. In the early 1900s, football was used as a method to, quote, indoctrinate modern labor practices such as teamwork and competition within a set of rules upon the unskilled Mexican workers. So you almost have this culture around the game where it's part of like the imperialism of the previous generations. And soccer is a very central thing. It's the biggest sport in Mexico. And it's got a lot of history and a lot of cultural resonance.
I will say, Eric, with regards to that, I just want to mention, I know we didn't touch on it and we're going to get back to soccer, but I did want to mention that just the sports culture in Mexico is very unique and just outstanding as well. In addition to soccer is far and away the biggest sport, but they have a lot of sports that they really do love and enjoy. Baseball, lucha libre, wrestling, bullfighting, basketball, and boxing. Boxing has become, one of those mega sports as well down there, but it all reverts back to the passion and the culture that was created through the soccer.
Yeah, I will say that the last thing before we get back to the soccer, when I was in Mexico City, the main like lucha libre organization, it was like their one off week over the summer, and so I unfortunately was not able to attend, but that is like high up on the next time I make it over to go.
I went in 2013 with a bunch of AODC people. We are also going on this trip to a lucha libre show. Unfortunately, you guys, I don't know if you're not getting in until the night before party for AO, then you're going to miss it. But they do have them on Tuesdays and Fridays. They just restarted them due to COVID, or at least letting fans back in. So, we're getting to go to a show, which I cannot wait for. I got my lucha libre mask from 2013 ready to go.
Yeah, unfortunately, I'm going to miss out on that. But yeah, like even going back to the cuisine, like the sports, it's a diverse, regionalized thing, but soccer is the most pervasive. They've got a pretty developed league system. At the top, you've got Liga MX or Liga MX. I don't know which one I'm supposed to say because I don't quite know how I'm supposed to pronounce it, but that's like the Primera Division. That is the top first tier of Mexican soccer. Their season is split into 2 seasons. They do the Apertura and the Clausura, spring season and the fall season. Each year is those 2 tournaments. They actually just went through kind of an overhaul. The Mexican Football Federation developed this financial stability plan, try to like make these leagues a little more stable. They took the second division, the former Ascenso MX, and turned that into the Liga de Expansión MX. There is pro rel in the game plan for those leagues, but due to the pandemic, they've actually decided that there won't be any promotion or relegation for the next 5 years. So you got Liga MX on top, you've got Liga de Expansion below that. Underneath that is Liga Premier, which was 3rd tier. That's actually 2 divisions in one. And then the 4th tier is Liga TDP, which is 17 groups with over 200 teams across the country. It's like there's this huge pyramid, Mexico.
Yeah. I will say for the on the pro rel side, they actually were having plans to do it, or to eliminate it basically for 5 years. And the reason why is they're looking kind of at a model of how a closed model system or closed league system would work, a la Major League Soccer. And obviously, as you know, with the collaborations that they've had between MLS and Liga MX, they've been trying to see how that would work on the Mexican side. I think what exacerbated it was COVID starting as they were implementing plans for this to happen, for this to work. They wanted to build up to 20 teams and they end up having to cut a couple because they weren't able to make it through COVID, or I guess they end up moving a team to make it, make it work.
Yeah. So it's a still in progress transformation of major professional soccer in Mexico. But the palace of Mexican soccer is the Estadio Azteca. In Mexico City, Estadio Azteca is the big main stadium. It is the home of the national team. It is home of 2 Liga MX teams, Club America and Cruz Azul. Opened in 1966. It was host of the 1970 World Cup final, the 1986 World Cup final, and it will be hosting games in the 2026 World Cup, set to be hosted throughout North America. It is also the site of Maradona's goal of the century and Hand of God goal, like 2 legendary soccer moments.
Which were the same game.
Which were in the same exact game in the 1986 World Cup, which is mind-blowing if you think about it. It's like 2 iconic goals happening like in one 90-minute frame. Absolutely absurd. Current capacity is 87,523, but it was built and has staged many events with over 100,000 people. I know right now they're doing reduced capacity through COVID, through suspensions and disciplinary reasons. They're doing reduced capacities, but is one of the largest stadiums on the continent. Also, quick trivia. Do you know who the first sold out concert was at Estadio Azteca? We got a guess.
Menudo?
What'd you say?
Menudo?
Did you read the article?
No, I didn't. That was legitimately.
You're right.
That was legitimately a guess.
Menudo. Exactly who you would have guessed. No. So Estadio Azteca, host of numerous major events, some NFL games, some major boxing matches. I know you've already referenced that boxing's huge down there. But yeah, also home to a sold out Menudo concert in 1983. So Aztec, the stadium, and Donald, you've been there. Do you want to? Also, Jonathan, you've been there as well. I'm the only one of us that hasn't. What's the stadium like?
It is just a absolute imposing figure of the area. Like, it is incredibly big as a stadium, and you get in there and so Donald, you've never been for anything other than a US game, have you?
That's correct. Two U.S. games.
2 US games. And I've been just to one. So like, I mean, you come in and like where you're sitting is, at least where they put the away fans, I mean, is up in the stratosphere. Like you are way up there. Even the stands that are up there have this massive pitch to them. So like, standing at the back of the section, like toward the top, like, I mean, it's a pretty sharp angle looking for it. And it is just a incredible massive things, massive like people of concrete, of seats. It's a pretty incredible stadium.
It's simply a bucket list stadium. It really is. Of the stadiums on the entire planet, if you're a sports fan of any kind, you should get to Estadio Azteca to see a game there. And of course, Eric, you're going to get to cross off with the biggest game that possibly goes in there, short of a World Cup final that they've hosted a couple of times. But I will add that not only is it tall, Mexico City itself sits about 7,800 feet above sea level. So the idea is putting the away fans at the upper part of the stadium. You have to climb up like several ramps to get to your section, and then you have to climb into your section and then climb down, then climb back up. You are gassed before you even get to your seat. And that's by design. They want you to be gassed so that you can't spend your time cheering, all giving all your energy for your team, because you have to catch your breath. It's one of the most intimidating home field advantages on the face of the planet. And Mexico for decades has used it to their advantage.
Yeah. And they've used it to their advantage as it is their national stadium. It's pretty much like, I know in the US, the national team will play all over the place. In Mexico, if there's a big game, it's Estadio Azteca. That's where they're playing. And I'm really excited to see it. But speaking of those national teams, Donald, do you want to tell us a little bit about their women's national team and where they're at right now?
Yeah, it's funny. Their national team, we've talked about the women's national teams for several countries on this podcast, and we talk about how new they are. Well, this is one of the oldest women's national teams in the world. They actually started back in 1963, though, and they were doing games. They were competing in tournaments. There actually was an offshoot Women's World Cup that FIFA does not recognize in the late 60s, early 70s, and they placed third in that in 1970. They actually hosted it in 1971. They were officially recognized by FIFA in 1991 and have been obviously playing recognized FIFA events since then. Their biggest win was a 10-0 victory over Martinique back in October 2014. Their biggest defeat was in April 1991 to the United States of America, 12-0. You're going to guess it. I was pointing at you. You didn't guess it quick enough. But yeah, so the United States beat them back in April 1991. They're currently ranked 27th in the world, but they've really just been in the 20s for almost the entirety of their existence. Their lowest is 31, and they were there for like 1 month and then jumped back up into the 20s. They have qualified for 3 FIFA Women's World Cups, 1999, 2011, and 2015. And they've also participated at 7 CONCACAF Women's Championships. They finished second in 1998 and in 2010. The thing about Mexico's women's team is, unlike their men, they live primarily in the shadow of the United States and Canada in the women's game. And after they didn't qualify for the 2019 World Cup, they actually went on a downward spiral for a year or so. But what they did was they took the money that they had, were gaining hand over fist from the men's team, and they reinvested it in the women. And I think they did great at doing that. They formed a domestic league. They pumped resources into strengthening the national team and getting them in front of high quality competition. You'll see some Mexican players play in MWSL and abroad, also in the Liga MX Femenil. They have done a really good job at doing that. And as a result, they are probably the third best team in CONCACAF, and they are poised to possibly qualify for the 2023 World Cup and have a shot at the 2024 Olympics. They have to finish qualifying this month or in April, and then this summer at the W Championship. But this is a team that's not necessarily on the rise. They've always been there, and they're just looking for the perfect time to strike, and that perfect time for them maybe right now.
Well, they're hosting that W Championship as well.
Exactly.
That'll be taking place in Monterrey this summer. So you wonder if the little home field advantage might do them some good. So a lot of opportunity for the women's national team. Jonathan, do you want to touch on the men's national team?
Yeah, I mean, I'll touch on them. I mean, this is a national team that needs absolutely no introduction. I feel like for any fan, fan in CONCACAF. I mean, they have for the longest time, you know, been seen as the gold standard long term of CONCACAF soccer. Currently, their current 12th in the FIFA rankings, their highest ever they've been was 4th, and they've hit that a few different times. They are up until 2026. They will be the only CONCACAF nation that has hosted 2 World Cups. So they hosted both, the 1970 World Cup and then, of course, the 1986 World Cup. They got that one based on the fact that, Colombia had originally been awarded the tournament. There was, a few different issues around some of the just unrest in the area. And as far as, I think there were some natural disaster issues as well. And then they ended up giving that to Mexico instead. So they've hosted 2. Their best finish in a World Cup came in both of the World Cups that they hosted. So they finished the quarterfinals of 1970 and 1986. Looking at, currently how it is, I mean, of course, they have a very fierce rivalry with the United States, and that goes from not just on the field, but of course from the dual national perspective as well. We know that, with the United States being a nation of immigrants, there's of course a lot of people that, are both Mexican and American, and they, have to make a decision of, what national team that they are going to represent. So, I mean, some of the, probably most famous dual nationals, of course, the guys like Carlos Bocanegra, Omar Gonzalez, Hercules Gomez, and then even recently, looking at someone like Ricardo Pepi, who chose and then chose the United States, and then Julian Araujo and Efrain Alvarez, who chose Mexico. So, I mean, that's kind of a brief overview, but I feel most people are familiar with the Mexican national team.
Yeah, and I do feel like we might get to a point as development in the United States continues to grow and the Mexican American population gets more opportunity to develop, that we might down the road see a Mexican national team with even more US players than just 1 or 2 depth guys. Like, you might eventually see star players who grew up in the US and now they're representing Mexico, which is going to be a very interesting dynamic considering the rivalry. All right. So thanks for the info on the national teams. We're going to bring in an expert here to talk more about Mexico. We're going to take a quick break, and then we're going to get a bucket. We're going to bring in the Let's Get a Bucket segment and talk to old friend of the show, Jon Arnold, about Mexico, soccer, and El Tri. We'll be right back. All right, we are back, and we are very fortunate to have a guest back on the show. Jon Arnold joined us last year, and he is back to talk more CONCACAF and talk to us about Mexico. Jon, how are you doing today?
I'm good. It's great to be a returning champion on World of CONCACAF. And if I'm not mistaken, the last time I was here, I was talking about Anguilla, which is the worst ranked team in CONCACAF. So I'm happy to be here to talk about the best ranked teams. I mean, I don't feel like I'm a bookends type guy, but I guess we're covering the full spectrum.
Oh yeah.
Also, when you talk to Grant, I know there's a bit of a brewing war about the real team, fake team game that you guys have done. But you are the first 2-time returnee. Like, you're the first time to come back to the show. So you're gonna have to tell Grant he's got to come back.
That's the tiebreaker.
But you could always say you're the first one to be second.
All right. Yeah. Fair enough. Yeah, he'll never be the first like I was. So it's good to be here, guys. Glad to chop it up, and of course, I think my love of the CONCACAF region is well known, so I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, you're the expert here. So, so this episode we're focusing on Mexico, and there's a lot about Mexico. And Mexico is a big soccer country. You're very familiar with Mexico. What is it about soccer in Mexico that makes it so culturally important?
Yeah, that's a big question. It's a good question. I think first of all, like, people haven't followed my work or don't know me a little bit. Sometimes I can come off wrong. I was really careful in the aftermath of the Queretaro violence brawl situation to sort of like put my credentials out there. I lived in Mexico. I've covered the league and the national team for around a decade now, which makes me sound old, and maybe I am, but this is a country that I'm familiar with, that I lived in, and that I've followed from a football standpoint for even longer than I've been writing about it. My story, like a lot of people's, I think, in the US, was based on access, and for me growing up, we had broadcast TV, and the only soccer you were getting on the weekend was Univision. And so, grew up watching some of these teams. But I think that story is more pertinent for Mexican Americans, for Mexicans, where you just grow up every weekend watching your team with your pops, with your grandpa, with your mom, whoever it is that has that love of football. And I think that's where it starts. And of course, the participation is quite large in Mexico. You see everyone playing. When you go to Mexico, you see people play. And like, I think it's easy to have this picture of like dusty Mexico, people playing in the streets or whatever, but like people are playing in very nice fútbol rápido, like futsal type places, and these beautiful facilities, kind of public civic facilities. When I lived in Tijuana, where infrastructure is it's kind of all it's mishmash, there's still 3 or 4 places where it's just like, oh yeah, of course you go down there, get a game, and it's going to be pretty high level. So I think that sort of combines to make Mexico this football country. And then you have the history, right? Just the dominance they've had in the CONCACAF region, the connections they've had with South America, this desire to overcome, to reach the Quinto Partido in foreign soil. When you have that sort of continuous cycle, when the national team kind of pushes the story forward basically every year, I think you have people really hanging on that. I do think the national team is an interesting moment. Maybe we'll get into this, where I'm not so sure the support is as strong as it used to be. I think some of the mystique of the Azteca is gone. Hector Herrera himself mentioned that a couple windows ago. And I think that you see people caring less and less about the national team for various reasons. That, like I said, we can get into. But that being said, whether or not the national team is as popular as it once was, it's still very clearly the most popular sports team in Mexico and one of the most popular sports teams in the US. So I think when it is that sort of common ground for so many people, that's how you get something that means something to a lot of people. It's special to my friends, it's special to my mom, to my dad, it's special to me. And I think that's where the love of the national team comes from, and the love of the game just from being passed down. It is heritage.
You've been to a few League MX games, just whether you're covering it as a fan, what have you. And I know when we talk about, when American fans talk about soccer in Europe, they talk about how unique the game day atmosphere is, the experience. What uniqueness brings you to, or anyone to say that, hey, League MX has it that other leagues in this hemisphere don't? And coinciding with that, you just talked about the national team and its quote unquote waning popularity. Does that have something to do with it? Have people become a little bit more club over country in Mexico because of that, the roots that Liga MX already has?
Yeah, I think so. I think Liga MX, the popularity is enormous, and you have this sort of, there's natural lines that are drawn, your Chivas or your America, and then there's the clásicos within the cities, Clásico Regio between Tigres and Monterrey, kind of a friendlier rivalry historically, the Clásico Tapatío between Atlas and Chivas. You have all these kind of rivalries where even if you're not paying attention to the games, you're picking a side. Even if you don't know who is the starting forward for Chivas, if you family grew up rooting for Chivas, you're going to say Chivas is better than Atlas, right? I think the game day experience is quite unique, but I think one thing that gets sort of missed, and it's I'm not sure why, is that varies wildly from place to place. And that sounds very logical because so does the MLS game day experience, right? Like it's going to be totally different if you go to an Atlanta United game or a Philadelphia Union game or an LAFC game or a Seattle Sounders game. And why is it different? Well, because of cultural factors, how popular is soccer in that region? And because of marketing, how much has the club done to try and bring people in? Because of a history, how good has the club been, or how well have they been able to attract people to the stadium? How nice is the facility? How cheap are the tickets? These are all these factors that make it quite different based on club. I lived in Tijuana, and so you saw this fascinating blend of the Mexican soccer culture with the American sports culture. There's tailgating before the game. Literally, people are driving their trucks across the border, from California, popping the tailgate down, having their beers, grilling meat. In Monterrey, you have some of that culture, but a lot of it is watching the game at home. We do the carne asada. We have sort of a family environment. Stadium atmospheres are great there, don't get me wrong, but it is a different vibe than Tijuana, which is a different vibe from Mexico City, where you take the metro to the game and that light rail to the Azteca, which is like one of the worst experiences in the world. I know some of us will be experiencing that here in a couple of days. But everything else is pretty good public transportation wise. So I don't know. It's just like a different vibe in each of these markets, in each of these stadiums. But I do think that like you see in the stadiums, like you see one of the real shames of the Queretaro incident is that I would say typically Liga MX is a big time family affair. And you see, even in that incident, you saw kids running onto the field for safety. You saw people protecting kids from different, jokers that were doing the wrong thing, that were committing crimes, that were committing acts of violence, that were being disgusting individuals, and that should be in jail, right? So I think that also colors, unfortunately, the recentness of that, as we're having this conversation 2 or 3 weeks after that happened, like also colors the kind of like big picture narrative of like, hey, what's it like to go to a Liga MX game? Because it's hard to talk about after that, because it's like, you've seen, I've been in stadiums before. I've reported on, hey, there's a little skirmish between barras, between these organized groups, but for the most part, it doesn't get to that. And you see hundreds of people with their families, with their kids. And so I think that's the typical atmosphere of Mexico. That's a typical atmosphere of Liga MX game, is everyone's there, everyone's having fun, but then you see these moments where that's clearly not the case. And so, I guess like, I don't know. I don't know if that helps get a picture, but I think it, like, in some ways it's everything. And in some ways it's, certain things make it just a little different. It's certainly different from an MLS game. It's certainly different from going to a game in Argentina or other places in South America. And it's way different from going to a game in Europe. It definitely has its own unique character. And I think part of it is the family vibe. But part of it also is the kind of intenseness and passion that does exist that we saw unfortunately spill over into something quite different.
Yeah. Now, obviously that incident garnered a lot of attention, and if you had social media, you were aware of what was going on almost live while it was happening. Do you feel like it's almost going to be a tipping point? Has this been like a building issue, or are we going to see this going forward?
I think that you're already seeing some of the clubs kind of clean. We all have those spaces in our house where we're not proud, that corner of a closet where you're like, I actually have my moving boxes there, even though I've lived here for 3 years or whatever. Maybe that's a crass analogy, but I think it's the same where like some of these clubs are starting to be like, you know what, we do have that dark corner, and it doesn't have to be barras. It doesn't have to be organized fans. I've seen, clubs say like, oh, we need to make the stadium more wheelchair accessible. We've kind of been like overlooking that. Like this hasn't been something that we've taken seriously. We need to do that, right? I've seen clubs say like, we've been lax with our ticketing policies, the way it works. And I do think you're going to see a revolution when you combine what the federation is trying to do to combat the homophobic chant with this new incident, this unfortunate recent incidents of violence. I think you're going to see a fan ID program that's like countrywide, where you're going to have some sort of barcode or identifier to scan before you go into almost every game. That type of program was already in place for Mexico's last qualifiers, where 2,000 people were in attendance. That type of program has been in place in Jalisco for the Clásico already. So we're seeing that more and more. And I really do think that you're going to see more, I don't even know what you'd call it, like digital policing in a way, or just like tracking to make sure that when fans do the wrong things and they get kicked out, that you can actually enforce these bans. Because look, like, I mean, it's tough if you say, oh, well, the fan should be banned from stadium for life. I agree with you. But how do you enforce that, right? If a Queretaro fan who was part of that brawl shows up at Atlas in 2 years and they buy a ticket and they walk through, like, I don't think they're going to have a list of all the guys or, everybody's face on the corner. It's a difficult thing to enforce unless you have some sort of technology. So I think the tipping point is there, that I think the league and the federation as well for national team games, it's getting smarter about these things. This is already part of the idea. Again, that, if a fan yells the bad word, they are kicked out. They are banned for, I think it's 4 or 5 years. I can't remember. I wrote it, but I think it's 5 years.
5 years.
How do you enforce that ban? Well, you need some sort of identifier. So that's what you have now. And I think that's the change that you see in Mexican soccer is it enough? I think it goes in the right direction. I think you could do more, but it's also easy for me to say that sitting here, but look, like, if you don't start to pay attention to barras, to fights, to violence around the game, and I think, I wrote in my newsletter, like, even deeper into society in a way, this kind of organized ultra violence that you see, unfortunately, with organized crime, with drug trafficking, with these different situations. Like, if you don't sort of accept that as a reality and something that could happen, like, you will see more of these incidents. So it's on the leaders now. I mean, it's on Jon de Luisa, the federation president, who I think has acted well. It's on Mikel Arriola, the league president. And the Liga MX is such a sort of confederated league, or such a split up league, where the club owners have so much power. And so it's on them as well. If you have this responsibility to be a club owner, then you need to take the responsibility when something terrible happens, and also make sure that something doesn't happen, that these dark areas that you have in your closet are clean when you put the light on them. It needs to, I don't feel like I need to give a condemnation for what happened, because obviously everyone condemns that. If you're human, you see that, you're like, what, this is, yes, this is terrible. So, I mean, look, like, but I think it does have to be, and I as a journalist, like, what I try to do, even from abroad, from a foreign perspective, is put the blame in the right place and say, look, like, obviously the people committing these actions are the ones responsible for the actions, but it happened in this environment that was fostered by those who are in charge. So I'm going to be watching closely what the response continues to be. The initial response, I think it's okay. I would have gone farther if I were in charge, but let's see kind of how it goes. But also, you can't take a let's see how it goes approach if people's lives are in stake. So you have to make sure it's a safe environment. You have to not lose that family feel, because if you lose that, you've lost some of the soul of Mexican soccer. So we'll see.
Real quickly, I know we're not going to get into all of the things that have come down as far as punishments or sanctions or things like that. But one thing I thought was curious was the banishment of away fans from Liga MX games for, I think it's for a year, or for the rest of the season at least. And they'll reevaluate at the end of the season. Do you think that's going to change how, I mean, obviously there's a lot that's going to change going forward, but do you think that fundamental thing is going to change the uniqueness of the passion and the intensity that comes from some of these games?
No, I don't think so. I mean, I think it's necessary now, and breaking up these barras, look, like, it's tough because, like, there's people in the barras who just feel like that's their identity, that want to support their club, but there's also a legitimate element in a lot of them that's not good. So, I mean, I think they're on the way to being banned completely, these groups, although that wasn't the step that was taken in the immediate aftermath. They're on that path, and I think it gets done. And so, then becomes a question of how organized is organized support. Is traveling support always organized supporters groups, right? Like, but I don't think with these measures right now, Mexican soccer risks losing that identity. I think the bigger threat, which the owners and administrators have correctly identified, is like, it is an existential threat if something like this happens again, especially in the near future, because who would take their kid to the game if they think, yeah, you might have to run for your life? I mean, it just, so, but I think the banning of the traveling support, I think, I do think it's going to be temporary, but I think how these groups are organized will fundamentally change, hopefully for the better, in the next few months.
Now, we're talking about fan support. Let's kind of move over towards the national team, because you mentioned that it's almost been sort of waning. where do you think the program sits in the national consciousness right now?
Yeah, it's at the top of the national consciousness. I think that it's easy to look at Mexico, especially as America's neighbor, and just be like, wow, they're so soccer obsessed. And it's true. And, the things I've said leading up to this point in the podcast, I say and believe, right?
Yeah.
But I do think it's, I live in Dallas, Fort Worth, and like culturally, everyone's a Cowboys fan, right? Everyone just roots for the Cowboys. But do people really know how their defense is playing? Maybe, maybe not, right? Do they know what the schemes are? Maybe, maybe not. I'm not gatekeeping. I'm not saying you can't be a fan if you don't have those things. It doesn't matter. If you root for the team, you root for the team. That's cool, support in your own way. But I think like that's the case with the Mexico national team. And I don't think they've done a great job as new modes of entertainment have become available, as you can stream whatever show you want to watch. It is a huge deal. The games are on both Televisa and Azteca. This war, quote unquote, maybe that's a poor choice of words, this ratings competition between these two networks is like front page news. Like it gets covered by all the, every news outlet, because it's just always fascinating. These two TV companies control so much of what happens, not only in Mexican sports, although they control a lot there, but even in Mexican life. But as you've seen that sort of stratification happen, the loss of monoculture, which has accelerated everywhere in the world, but definitely in North America in the last decade and a half. I think you see people become more and more detached from the national team. And you've also seen the national team detach themselves from the country. Mexico makes huge money, and business-wise, it makes very, very much sense to play in the United States 5 times a year. But every time you play in Oakland or Memphis or whatever, I guess Nashville and Orlando are places they actually play. Like you don't play in Monterrey or Guadalajara. And I think that you lose that closeness with the national team, especially when there is a national stadium in Mexico City, which is 100% the biggest city, massive, massive population. And yet, when you look at the cities that are soccer cities in Mexico, Monterrey, I think, is number 1. Guadalajara is probably number 2. Yeah, they love soccer in Mexico City, but it doesn't have the same sort of like resonance that it does. And then that's not even getting into like, what about other, like León? León's a soccer city. We know that the club is good. We see them all the time in CCL. National team doesn't play there. You could go down the list, right? Tijuana, they never play in Tijuana, but they could, but they don't, right? And so I think it becomes like this sort of like, if they don't care about my city, if they don't care about me, why would I care about them? And there's also the frustration of what happens on the field, right? There is this mentality that Mexico should just be number 1, should llegar caminando, should walk to the World Cup. And that's not really the reality anymore in CONCACAF, not just because of what the United States is doing, but because of what Costa Rica and El Salvador and Panama are doing, right? And what other countries are doing. Even in the Nations League, I think a decade ago, Mexico really does smash Bermuda when they play in the Nations League. That's not necessarily the case anymore. Sometimes it happens, but a lot of times it doesn't. So I think there's a frustration from fans that they just feel like, hey, we should be smashing them. We should be better. And I think it's fair to say we should be better in qualification. We should be better against these top teams. But at the same time, I think it leads to discontent. People are frustrated with the manager, and people saying like, well, why would I watch this team? They suck. I mean, I don't know. Like, it's weird because I think the bigger factor is the prices are high to get into the stadium, although not high from a US standard, but they are high to go see the national team, and you have to be in one place to do it. And I think you lose that relationship that they've had for so long with the fan base. So I don't know what you do to repair that. And look, like the homophobic chant, I believe it's homophobic, first of all. I believe it should be eradicated. And I think that De Luisa and the Federation are doing good things to make that happen. But that's a split too, man. And not everyone agrees that it's a bad thing. Not everyone agrees with those statements. Not because they want to yell homophobic things, but they don't view it as homophobic because of linguistic nuances, because of cultural nuances. So I think even that is like a schism, right? And you just see these fractures with the Federation and the national team and the fan base. And look, it's still a beautiful love story. You still see, when I was in Russia in 2018, Mexico fan base was the best one there by far. The passion, the energy, the numbers, sheer numbers, a lot of people went to support Mexico. People who didn't even go to games, didn't even have tickets, they're just wearing the national team shirt around, watching at the fan zones, having a beer. Huge numbers of fans. Like the Mexican fan is still amazing. And look, we see it in the US, right? When the US plays Mexico, they have to do tricks to make it so it's not a big capacity Mexico crowd. People always joke, what if you put it in North Dakota? What if you put it in Alaska? People would still show up, man. People would
Yeah.
still show up. The passionate fan is still passionate. The fan base is still incredible. But I do think that when you talk about this sort of like big picture, there is this disconnect now. So I don't know. I don't know how you fix it. And maybe you don't. Maybe this is international football from here on out, right? Like people are happy if your team is winning and they tune in, but otherwise they're not that connected. But yeah.
And I know we're running short on time, but I do, just for where we're sitting right now. You talked about how there's the pressure on, they notably have 0 Nations League titles.
Yeah, that's a big disconnect with the fan base as well. Everyone's like, we want the Nations League.
Yeah.
And they should, but they can't get it.
They can't get it. Someday, maybe someday. Doubtful. But anyways, they have not locked up qualification yet. Things look very good for them based on their remaining schedule. But this upcoming game is crucial with the United States at home. The U.S. has won 3 big games against them. How much pressure is on Tata Martino and the Federation to win this game?
It's interesting because I think that the pressure is there, but I don't know that it's changed from any previous meeting. You know, like I mentioned, the Federation being more progressive, dealing with the homophobic chant, you know, the way they work with the clubs. And I think you see it with the leadership as well, as far as Tata Martino's job status. He lost 3 official matches to the US last year, 2 of them for trophies. But I don't feel like his job has ever been in that much of risk. Martino himself kind of, I think it's a motivational tactic, told his players after the loss in Canada that he would resign if they felt like they weren't going to be able to work with him. And they apparently backed him. This is all reports, you know, Tata's not coming out and saying that, but that's the story. Seems feasible to me and plausible. But I think the Federation has said Tata's our man, and he kind of has to be, right? Especially at this point, because if you lose to the US, still probably can get to the World Cup, right? You got El Salvador at home. Bless their hearts, they've been really fun this cycle, but should beat them. You got a trip to the worst team in the final round, so you should still be fine. And what are you going to achieve firing Martino after this game? The project has always been, from minute 1 when Martino sits in the chair and is wearing Mexico national team gear and accepts the job, to get to the 5th game of the World Cup. But it also makes it an extremely tight, like the pressure never goes away, because it doesn't matter what you do. It doesn't matter if you win the Gold Cup and the Nations League and the qualification game against the US, and you have 3 victories against the US instead of 0. You still have to win this game, get qualified, because you have to get out of the group and win a game at the World Cup. That's the standard in 2022 in a World Cup year, but it's also the standard in 2019 when you're like trying to build toward this thing that's happening years in the future, which is tough in soccer. So I think the pressure never goes away for Tata Martino. There is extra pressure because it's a rivalry game. There is extra pressure because Mexico has never lost a qualifier to the US at the Azteca. They never lost a game to the US at the Azteca. But in a way, it's like a fish in the ocean. It doesn't know any different. The pressure is always surrounding you. So I think it's an important game. I'm writing in the newsletter right now. Martino, just like Greg Berhalter, has big decisions to make that I think could really decide whether or not they get 3 points in this game. You know, I know the US has injuries. I know people are worried. Fair enough. Mexico does too. And they have suspension to Hector Herrera, which I think is really important. So that's what the newsletter will focus, a little teaser there. But yeah, I just think like there is absolutely pressure, but it's not unusual. It's something that has been around for a long time. But is Tata Martino going to get fired if they lose this game, the 4th loss in an official game to the US? I don't think so, because I think the Federation really has a long-term vision for the first time in a long time. Like Martino would have lost his job under previous administrations, I think, after, you know, if not the first loss in a final to the US, the second one. But it's a different era, and the vision is more long-term in a lot of ways. And I think that's serving Mexico well, big picture, but you might have some of the growing pains too. I think fans are frustrated. You know, I think the love affair with Tata Martino is over, but they might call him back. They might be sending him some drunk texts, you know, if things go the right way. So I think that's the status. I think that's where things are. There is pressure. It is demanding, but ultimately the standard or the measuring stick is the World Cup, and those can only come every 4 years.
So for this window, I mean, it's the last window of World Cup qualifying.
Yeah.
You have not just this game. I obviously the Mexico-US game is probably the biggest game on the calendar whenever those two teams play in CONCACAF. But looking at the window, I guess fill in the blank. If Mexico qualifies for the World Cup and has a successful window, it'll be because X player stepped up. Who is that player to step up?
I think, there's a bunch of star names, and I think they need goal scoring. They haven't been good in front of goal. Raul Jimenez, obviously had a sort of the weirdest injury, serious situation, possible. And he hasn't been the same since the injury. Chucky Lozano has been injured for a lot of the campaign. But I think when you look at this window specifically, and especially the game against the US, the player is Edson Alvarez. If Mexico can win a midfield battle or win 2 midfield battles, they'll be fine. But then that hasn't necessarily happened. Edson's been fantastic. I think he's been one of the best players in CONCACAF in this entire qualification cycle, but he hasn't always gotten help. He's been left stranded sometimes by Hector Herrera and Andres Guardado, who are starting to show their age, which isn't good for Mexico. But both those guys are missing for this game against the US. The problem is, who's going to fill in for them? I don't know. And so Alvarez needs to have a superb game. He needs to have a 9 out of 10 player rating for them to boss even a US midfield without Weston McKennie, I think. So we'll see what Berhalter does. I know that people are saying maybe he rests everyone and focuses on Panama, but I think there's a real opportunity there in the midfield for the US, even without McKennie. So I think it's Edson Alvarez. I think he's the key man. He gives you calmness in the midfield. He can start attacks. But he's so good at destroying the play and then getting his head up and distributing. It's quite a change and quite an evolution from a guy who was crying after the third group match of the World Cup in 2018 because he committed an own goal, had a terrible game in that game against Sweden and Mexico, botched and barely made the knockout rounds because of. Now it's a totally different story. Confident, cool, collected, and capable. So I think it's him. They need somebody to score. They need to finish their chances, but they also need to not be vulnerable in the midfield and have some of their center backs protected too, because you can get a little iffy there. So I think he's the key man.
All right. Well, appreciate you taking the time. Obviously, big game coming up on Thursday night at the Azteca. You've been to the Azteca before. Any recommendations for Mexico City?
Ooh, I mean, that's like saying any recommendations for New York. Get there early to the game for sure, but I hope people explore. I think it's very easy to just stay in the hotel and take an Uber to the stadium. And I think most people who have that traveling spirit are probably going to be able to get out and about. I haven't been to Mexico City since COVID-19 became a factor, but eat street food, man. I mean, I know some people get worried about that, but you're going to have a great experience. Tweet at me at Arnold, John. Tell me what neighborhood you're in. I'll get you a taco recommendation. Tell me what neighborhood you're in. People ask me it's like saying hey, where should I in New York City? It's well, I don't know, man. If you're in Long Island, I'm not going to send you a man. Okay. So send me a neighborhood. I'll send you some tacos. But eat the street food, explore the culture. Obviously, be respectful. I don't know. I'm not your dad. I'm not trying to lecture people, but I think it'll be a good trip, and I hope people get out and enjoy and experience the culture because it's awesome. It's a really, really cool place. I'm fascinated. I've never done a Mexico-US at the Azteca. I've done 3 or 4 different qualifiers before in the previous cycle, but I've never been. And obviously the capacity, reduced capacity is a big factor for this one as well. So I think it'll be fascinating. I think it'll still be extremely pro-Mexico, an extremely difficult environment. The altitude hasn't changed any. They haven't lowered Mexico City, so that'll still be a factor.
I heard Mexico City sinking a little bit, so
it is.
It may be a little lower.
I don't think big enough to make as much of a difference as maybe the U.S. national team would like. But no, to be honest, I can't wait. Like I said, I mean, I've never done one of these. It's still on the bucket list for me, so I'm extremely excited and honestly humbled. I'm traveling because of my newsletter. Which is just people supporting my work, and it's truly it's a it is humbling. It's like, oh man, like people want me to do this. And when a media company sends you there, they are saying that people want you to do this, but it's just a different feel. So I have some pride in like sending myself and having this CONCACAF project that I started 2 years ago kind of be validated by enough people who say, hey, I care about this enough to support this with my dollars that I know are well earned and hard earned by people. So I'm just rambling on a personal note now, but yeah, I'm excited, and great. I will send you taco recommendations if you send me your neighborhood.
Neighborhood. We got it. Neighborhood.
Yeah.
Hey, and some bars or whatever people are into. Try pulque as well. The Mexico kind of like traditional alcoholic drink. It's low alcohol, so you won't be stumbling after one or two. It's like a weird texture. You might not like it, but if you can find a place, there's like I've modern.
Had it before. It's
there's a bunch of places. There's a bunch of places, but there's like kind of a modern, like I guess I would say hipster pulqueria called Insurgentes, right by the big. I'm trying to think about it, like express it. My mind just goes to Spanish when I go to Mexico City. The big like circle train station right there, Pulqueria Insurgentes. You have Google Maps, you can find it. It's like kind of a modern spot, a bit of a party vibe. So check it out. What's the AO? Is AO doing like some party stuff or?
Yeah, so AO American I'll also be at Pinche Gringo's Barbecue Warehouse for the night before, and then we have a special pregame. I actually don't know where it is, but it's basically a private establishment where.
I'm not trying to sneak in, but okay. That's good.
Yeah,
that's good.
Well, you're invited.
You're invited. Definitely
guys.
invited. Come out to Pinche Gringo. But you were mentioning the great work that you're doing. Before we get you out of here, tell the people where they can find you and the fabulous work that you're doing for the Get CONCACAFed and also at Striker as well.
Yeah, I work with the Striker Texas, covering FC Dallas, covering Texas soccer. It's a subscription site that we launched a year ago, trying to kind of cover Texas soccer like soccer gets covered in Mexico or Argentina or Germany or whatever, kind of the marca or ole for the US. And then Getting CONCACAFed, as I mentioned, my own personal project where I just tell stories from around the region, analysis, heavy honestly into the analysis when it's big games like this, World Cup qualification. And when it's not, I just try and look for stories that I think need to be told from the region or just that kind of interest me. You can check out the work at getconcacafed.substack.com. Google Getting CONCACAFed, it'll pop up, or on Twitter at Arnold, John, spell out comma, no H in John. Just like, I think I probably made this joke last time, but it's so CONCACAF because everything is just a little more complicated than it needs to be. But if you look, I'm sure you can find it, and I'd love to have you there as a subscriber. It's $50 for the year, less than $1 an issue. That's for the premium edition. Plenty of great stuff on the free list. And again, I totally understand if that's where you need to be. But if you pay for it, I can keep affording to send myself to Mexico City, to Costa Rica to tell these stories and to get back, which is critical. Still pinching pennies for the flight, but no, I'm just kidding. I got everything booked. I'm looking forward to it. And yeah, I'll look forward to chatting with some of the World CONCACAF listeners over on the newsletter as well.
Yeah, no, worth every penny. Big fan of all your work. Thank you for taking the time to join us. And yeah, we'll see you down in Mexico City, won't we?
Oof. We will. I can't wait, guys. See you down there. Take care.
All right. Thanks, John. All right. We really enjoyed that interview with Jon Arnold. Really appreciate him coming by the show. We've got one major thing left to do on this episode, and it is real team or fake team. And Donald, you're up to bat. Are you feeling good about it?
I just got to get two. That's all I got to do, because last episode, somebody got one.
Yeah, we're not going to talk about that. That's in the past.
Oh, whoa. Eric got one? I know I wasn't here for the last.
You weren't there. Did you not listen to the episode? Come on.
I was busy.
Oh my God. We expect we want people listening to this podcast, and the host can't even listen to it. Jeez.
Hey, everybody, there's a reminder. Go back to the last episode. It's an all-timer for the real team, fake team. Just
listen to like the first half of the episode. That's all you really need. Get that play count up, and you can fast.
I'm going to shut up now for fear of also getting a one. So I'm just going to.
Yeah, don't worry. It comes back around. Donald. So if you don't know, Jonathan and I have 6 teams. We're going to alternate. These are potentially real soccer teams in Mexico. And Donald's got to tell us if these teams are real or fake. Jonathan, do you want to lead off here?
Yeah, I'll go first. Atletico Baja.
Atletico Baja.
Correct.
I know there's an Atletico San Luis who is part of that stupid team. So I'm going to go fake.
You are wrong. So Atletico Baja is a professional indoor soccer team that plays in the Southwestern
Indoor
Division.
soccer? Come on, man.
They play in the MASL, man.
Okay, that's fair. That's fair.
Yeah, they play in the MASL. It's like
I'll allow it.
I'm not picking like obscure fourth division teams.
Listen,
Is
it's a
that
real
foreshadowing?
team. It's a real team. That's all
It's
we
true.
need to
You're
know.
fair. Yeah, that's cool.
Down so
I'm
for
good.
One. It's 0 for 1. All right. Club de Football Calor.
That's fake.
Calor is a real team. They play in Liga Premier. They're based on Monclova. Club was founded in 2001. It was founded under the name El Calor de San Pedro, but is now commonly known as Calor.
Interesting. Okay. The heat or the hot.
So coming up next, we have Inter Playa del Carmen.
Inter Playa del Carmen. See, all these sound real and they all sound fake. I'm going to just go fake. Keep the fake thing going.
That is a real team. So Club de Fútbol Inter Playa del Carmen.
See, I shouldn't have shed shit.
is a football club that plays in Liga Premier. They, of course, are based in Playa del Carmen in Queretaro.
I knew Playa del Carmen had a team too, and I was trying to remember what the name of it was, but they must have two because that was not the name I was thinking of.
Their chief rival is Pioneros de Cancun.
That's what I was thinking of.
And their logo's dope.
Yes, it is.
So 0 for 3?
Mm-hmm. See, so just said anything.
Yeah. The calor is on, the heat's on. All right.
I'm wiping my brow for those of you in the audience who can't see.
Yeah, you got to describe it as a podcast.
Yeah.
All right. CD Ciudad de San Luis.
That's fake.
That is a fake team. That's St. Louis.
Because I knew
City
Atletico.
FC. That's St. Louis City FC in Spanish.
Yeah, but Atletico San Luis is a real team. They're
They
owned
can
by
have
that
two teams.
stupid team.
Yeah,
No, they can't because they're dumb. They can only have one. That's their punishment.
Okay. Damn it. All right. So Donald's 1 for 4.
All right. So my final team, Jalisco Terremoto.
Say that again.
Jalisco Terremoto.
Jalisco Terremoto. So like Jalisco earthquakes.
Correct.
This sounds fake, but I'm gonna go real.
It is a fake team.
Gosh, should have stayed with my shit. Just stay with my shit.
All right.
Hey, remember when I was talking shit about the 1 for 6? Just delete
Just
all
saying.
that. Just add all that out.
I said it comes back around.
Yeah,
I mean,
y'all
he
digging
still
in the
has
bottle,
two right.
scraping the bottom of a barrel. What league are they? Oh, that was fake. So never mind.
Yeah.
I should have just stuck with
what
it.
league are they?
All right.
They're in the fake league.
All right. All right. All right. Last one. H2O Peripetches FC.
H2O what?
Peripetches FC.
Parapatches? H2O Parapatches FC?
Yep.
I'm going fake.
That is a real team.
How?
H2O.
What does H2O stand
Peripetches.
for?
The club has its origins in Club Deportivo H2O, which is an amateur team managed by the Morelia Water and Sewage Management Body.
Wow. That
So
is
this-
the bottom of the barrel.
So this club plays in Liga TDP. They are in the 4th tier, and it was founded on July 25th, 2021. So it's like brand
Get
new.
the fuck out of here. You put the team that's like does diapers.
That's not even a year old. I didn't realize
That's
Eric,
not
when you-
what. How
It's a
am I
real
supposed to know
team.
that?
They playing. That's a real team. But I do want to know
That was
so
fake
it's
6 months ago.
So H2O is like the water and sewage management. Like that's that. Purepeches is actually like the name of the indigenous people of the area.
I knew that part.
So it's like it's almost like the teams in the US that are called the Indians. Like it's kind of messed up. So I don't like it, but
you used it anyway.
I used it anyway. So Donald's sitting on a 1 of 6.
Hey, remember when I said, "Yo, hey Eric, 1 of 6. We're the family. We're family now. We're the club." Do I get like a prize or something? Like another point?
Nope. Listen, there's only one rule in life, and it's talk shit, get hit. You know?
Yeah,
So,
I did. I mean, but here's the thing: I can still talk shit to you. You just can talk it right back. So
yeah, no one can talk shit at me because I've gotten 5 of 6 in one. So until one of you can hit those heights, I'm gonna talk all of the shit.
Your time is gonna come, Jonathan.
Your time is we're gonna get you for the
come.
one now. Yeah, you didn't sealed it now.
And the time has also come to wrap this thing up. Thank you to Jon Arnold for coming on. Make sure you subscribe to his Getting CONCACAFed newsletter. That's you follow him on the Twitter. It's at Arnold, COMMA Jon JON. Really appreciate him taking the time and coming back on the show, especially before this big game, big week. A lot of stuff going on. Donald, where can people find you?
At BlazingDW on Instagram or Twitter, or you can find me in Mexico this week.
Yeah.
Find me there.
And then you can find me at JSlapeSSP on Twitter, and then also at Broadway Sports Media and Speedway Soccer.
Yep. And if you're not already following us, at PodCACAF on all the social medias, your Twitter, your Facebook, your LinkedIn. We'll probably get a LinkedIn going. But most importantly, subscribe to our Patreon, patreon.com/PodCACAF. We've got various tiers. You can just donate $1 a month to support what we're doing. For $5 a month, you can get all this bonus content, interact with us, have some say in what we talk about on the show. And you also get our One More Round podcast, special bonus thing that will be posted on there right now. You sign up, you get automatic access. And once in a while, I write stuff. So you also get that too. So thanks for listening, and we'll see you out there.